Hello and welcome to another gauge demo from fitgauges.com. Today I'm going to show you a look at my new fuel management gauge. So this gauge enables you to change the amount of fuel in each tank, or you can group tanks and change the amount of fuel in a group of tanks. So it's quite a complex gauge and I'll try and keep it as simple as I can. So on this gauge all of the S buttons are used as well as both the dials. I'm going to cover the dials first. Now if you turn the right dial you would change the tank that is currently selected. So left and right will switch between all of them. If you highlight all, that will just show you the total fuel in percentage for all of your tanks. And as you highlight each tank you will see the percentage and capacities for each tank that you highlight. Okay, so if you want to see gallons instead of pounds, you can press the S5 button and it will switch between gallons and pound view for each tank. Now to select a tank, to add it to the group, you simply press the S1 button on the selected tank. So if you want to add left, center and right main into the group, then we have to select each tank. So I've now created a group. These three tanks are now in the group, and now when I turn the left dial I'm actually affecting the amount of fuel, which I'm decreasing now, in the group of tanks that I've highlighted, and I can now increase the fuel for that group as well. Okay, so I can add another tank to that group and then I can change all of them, all four that I've got highlighted there so far. Now if you select all, when you click S1 it will toggle all the tanks into the group on or off. So I can now change the fuel for all of the tanks. You've got to be careful you don't drop the fuel to zero, otherwise you'll cut your engines. So I can do that, and if you click again that'll turn them all off. So I'm going to cover the S buttons. So the S1, as I said, basically toggles the tank in and out of the group. So you can add left and right to a group, and now the left dial will affect only those two tanks. Now when there's no group selected, so let's turn them all off. So when there's no group selected at all, the left dial only affects the highlighted tank. So there's no group, so the group light is out, and now I'm only changing the fuel for that tank. I can change tank, and now I can affect the fuel for that tank. Now when you add a tank to group, the group light comes on, and now the left dial will adjust the values of all the tanks in that group. So at the moment there's only one tank in the group, so I can up and down that. So I can add more tanks to the group, and now I'm adjusting that group. And if you want to turn them all off, then you can toggle all. In addition to highlighting the all and pressing S1, if you hold the S1 button down, it will toggle all tanks on and off. So it'll add all tanks to group and remove all tanks to group. So it's a shortcut. If you hold S1, it's a shortcut from having to go and highlight all and then press the S1 button. It has the same effect. So the S2 button changes the background color. So that switches between the black and the blue backgrounds. Now this will also turn the black and blue backgrounds off on my other gauges as well. Right, the S3 button is a three-way toggle. So the first click will bring up the auto speed. So this is the speed that the auto refuel and dump fuel takes to actually fill and drain. So this is currently set to 1% per second. So that's the speed in which it will refuel. And the next click will take you to the percentage dump stop. So that's where you set the minimum amount that you want to drain your tanks to. So if you want to drain all your tanks to 5%, you'd set it to 5%. If you want the minimum to be 10, you can set that to 10. And when you dump the fuel, it won't drop below that level. Okay, so I'm going to set it back down to 5%. And another click of the S3 button takes you back to where you were. So I'm going to set that to 5% for the auto speed. Okay, so now the S4 and S5 buttons, sorry, S4 and S6 buttons are the refuel and dump buttons. So the S4 will automatically refuel all of the tanks that are in the tank group, and the S6 will dump all the fuel to your minimum amount within the tanks that are in the group as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove all the tanks from the group, and I'm just going to add these first three. Okay, so now I'm going to dump the fuel. I'm going to press the S6 button, and the red light comes on and the fuel starts to drain at my specified amount, which is at 5%. And when it gets down to my minimum, it won't go any further. Now it's showing 4% because it's not showing the points, so it's actually 4.9 because obviously the aircraft is draining fuel. So the moment you set it to 5%, it will drop to 4.9999 and it'll show it as 4%. And we can do the same with refuel. So I'm going to refuel now, and it'll refuel those three tanks at steps of 5% per second. And you can stop it at any time. So you can click the button again and the refueling will stop. You can click on the auto dump, and at any point you can click again and the dumping of fuel will stop. So let's go back and change the speed, set it to 1%, and then we refuel, and there you can see it's refueling at a rate of 1% per second. Now if you'd like it to fill instantaneous, then you just simply set the amount to 100%. So we'll stop, we'll set the auto speed to 100, and now when we dump the fuel, it will ditch all the fuel to the minimum, and you click refuel and it instantly refuel to the maximum as well. Okay, so you'll notice that the group light is on because we currently have tanks in that group. Now if we press and hold S1, we turn off the group, but if we were to individually select a couple of tanks, the group light comes on to indicate that you've started your group selection. Now if you turn off each of these, you'll notice that no tanks are in a group, but the group light is still on. Unfortunately, it's a limitation of the coding that if you want to turn off the group, you will need to press and hold the S1 to turn the group off, and now you're back to editing individual tanks again. So if you turn off all of the tanks from the group and wonder why you can't edit individual tanks, you just need to turn the group off by pressing and holding the S1 key, or you can go to all and you can turn it off just by hitting the S1 key, and you can toggle the group on or off. Okay, so in this example I'm currently draining the tanks, so I'm auto dumping fuel at 1% per second and all the tanks are currently dropping. Now if you were to change one of these tanks out of the group, then it will stop draining but the others will continue. So I'm going to toggle center 2 off, so that's no longer in the group. The other tanks will still continue to drop, but that tank is still remaining static. I'm going to increase the speed so it's a bit more visible, and we'll decrease. So you can see all the tanks, but the center tank is decreasing, and then I can toggle that back in and that will start to decrease as well. Okay, we'll stop that. And the same in reverse, I can start to load the tanks. Center is not moving, and I can add that to the group and that will start incrementing. So the change is in real time, so you can stop a particular tank from loading or dumping its fuel at any time. Okay, so I have built in a safety stop for the dumping of fuel. So if I set to 100%, so dump all fuel in 1 second, and if I set the dump stop to say 20%, now technically when I activate the dump, it's going to dump 100% of the fuel in the first second, which means it should drop it below 20%, but I've put a little check in there to prevent it from dropping below that 20%. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the tanks, and you can see they've all dropped down, but as you can see it stopped at 20%. So even though I do drop at 100, I don't actually commit that change until I validate it, then I set it to the minimum, and then I set that value. Okay, so I hope this has proved useful. You may have to go over the tutorial a couple of times before you can get your head around it. It's fairly complex, but once you get the hang of it, it sort of makes sense. Now this gauge is a massive credit to SPAD.neXt for allowing us to do so much within the gauge code. So I'm currently evaluating and making changes to variables within the gauge based on conditions actually running in the code of the gauge itself. This is not something that is normally done on the gauge, and as I say, all the timers regarding the speed of the refueling and the dumping of the fuel is all done and handled within the gauge software. So it's fairly complex, and it's the first time I've done something like this. Subsequently, this has actually taken quite some time to write. So I hope you appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy the video. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and come back and check out some of our other videos soon. Bye for now.